now with all the guided ascents. And I think if this all plays right, technology willing, we go from the cloud to Dubai to Mount Everest to the UK. This is a film that was shot by David Brashears, who runs a company called Glacier Works now, but you probably are better familiar with him from being the director of the IMAX movie. And he's kindly allowed me to show this. And it gives you about a minute and a half. So where we can go is from our living rooms and homes and wherever we're sitting right into Everest. And this is taken from a helicopter that flew in across Tibet, right over base camp, up the Khumbu Icefall, circled around the Lhotse Face, and then came back out across the West Ridge, which is the first climb I'm going to be showing you. It takes about a minute and a half, and hopefully it will kind of play through without too many glitches here. So that's Everest in all of its glory. And this is Everest Base Camp way back in almost the beginning of time, 1985, before there were carpets on the floors, heaters, chairs, tables, or any of that stuff, really. We had a bench down the middle made out of rocks, and we all kind of sat around in our coats and shivered, it seems like, most of the time. I'm on the far right, probably a little bit swelthier and hearthier than I am nowadays. So my dark hair. Next to me is Randall Grandstaff, who kind of features in my first story. And then the rest of the team gathered around the table. And the route that we'd gone to do was called the West Ridge Direct. And if you look down on it from about 8,000 meters, say, you can see the ridge extending out for probably a couple of kilometers and then dropping off into Nepal on the left and Tibet on the right. You can just see our 3 tents down there where I spent about a week when I was up high on the mountain fixing ropes with one of our Sherpas. So we had some fantastic climbing, and down low it was very steep. We were actually, we were doing leads, and we had the ropes, and we had pitons, and we had all the ice stuff to get us up the mountain. And it was a whole lot of fun, but at the same time, we were really what we call beginners on Everest, just getting up the hill. And as we climbed higher and higher, we eventually stayed in one of these small tents that was buried deep inside of a crevasse. And I was in there with Randall Grandstaff, and we spent 2 nights there. And by the second night, we had cerebral edema, to me to a very minor degree and him to a much greater degree. And by the time we stumbled out and started down the mountain, we weren't in particularly good shape. Jay Smith came up and pretty much rescued us and helped us down the mountain. But I was helping pull the ropes tight from below Randall because his feet were all over the place. And at one point, he knocked all the rocks off, and they came down and shot past me. And the only thing that really saved me was I leapt aside kind of at the last moment, purely using intuition to jump out of the way. And that was the first thing I learned, is that if you have a good apprentice in the mountains and you've learned kind of the right way to handle all your equipment and to be fit and healthy and jump around, the best thing to do in the end is just kind of listen to what your heart's saying and jump out of the way when you get the chance. So that pretty much saved me on my first expedition, but it was also a magical time at base camp because there was a Norwegian expedition there, and the climbing leader was Chris Bonington, who put together all the logistics, and it ran like clockwork. Arnie Ness from Norway managed it. and he did the fundraising and put it all together. And it was a very well-funded expedition. And David Brashears was there, who, as I mentioned earlier, went on to direct the IMAX movie, but this was one of his earlier times on Everest, and he guided Dick Bass to the top, thus finishing the 7 summits. And they went all the way from Camp 2 to Camp 4, and then from Camp 4 up to the top of the mountain, and did that final section without ropes. So I kind of learned, if you really want to organize an expedition properly, you kind of take the organizational skills of a Chris Bonington, you layer on the funding kind of nous of Arnie Ness, and then you put together a lightweight approach, and maybe you can get up the mountain in a completely different way. So I came away from that and started looking at different sides of the mountain. And at the time, only one team had ever made it up the east face, the Kangshung Face of Everest. It's remote, it's 4,000 meters high, it avalanches quite frequently. And it's really kind of an out of this world location. I shot this picture from Makalu, about 14 miles away, looking at Everest as the sun came up when we were climbing Makalu. So quite a unique view there. Just on the left-hand side in the cloud, you see the South Col, which I thought if we could get to that, we could then follow the regular southeast ridge, the route that Hillering and Tenzing took to the top. And on the right, you have the North Ridge leading down to the Northeast Ridge in clouds. I was very fortunate living in New Zealand because I got to know Ed Hillary quite well. And I think maybe I was quite frank with him originally when we started, and he invited me over to his house, and I got to meet him and went over for half an hour and spent 3, I think. And then he helped me out on a few climbs with, Robert, what do I need to do now? And I said, well, Ed, if I just go along to a press conference, there won't be anybody there. But if I invite you and you're there, everybody will come. And he goes, well, at least you're straight with me. And so he was my honorary expedition leader when I did the 7 summits. And he also introduced me to John Hunt, who was helped us out and was our honorary leader on the Kangshung Face. And the first thing that John Hunt taught me when I went to meet with him in London was it was all about the team. He'd been brought in after Eric Shipton was quietly slid to the side, and he had to put together a team of like high caliber personalities. And that's generally what makes a good climbing team, but they don't necessarily get along that well. I was fortunate in that the person that John Hunt recommended is on the right here, Stephen Venables. As you can see, he brought his girlfriend with him. Didn't get lonely. Ed Webster in the middle, who I climbed with on the West Ridge Direct, Paul Tier, who'd been recommended by Jay Smith, and then myself. So we put together this great team of people. We probably did some of the most fantastic climbing I think anybody's had a real chance to do on Everest. It was very steep to start. Stephen Venables compared it to the Eiger North Face with a few crevasses thrown in. I was down the bottom of this hole for about 3 hours, encouraging Ed to get up as quick as he could. As he climbed up and out of the crevasse. After that, he was just a little bit weary, so I got to cook the next day and then go back up and make the first ascent across the crevasse, fixed all the ropes, put in the anchor, slid across, put another rope in, and then slid back again. That opened our way up to the upper mountain. And a couple of weeks later, we were able to climb from the South Col up towards the summit. And this is just a shot of myself. Ed Webster took it looking down on me, Lhotse in the background, South Col just behind me there, flat snow there, and looking out over the Himalayas. As you can see, we were going rather lightly. We didn't carry packs. We had water bottles inside of our jacket pockets. We didn't wear harnesses. And we had an ice axe each, which is kind of a good light and fast way to go when you're going to the top of the world. I got up to the South Summit, and very fortunately, more fortunately, I would say, Stephen Venables got up to the very top, which was fantastic because he became the first British person to summit without oxygen, and he'd done a new route without any support. So this was the equivalent of our summit photograph, I always figured, was back down at the South Col. Unfortunately, over the next few days, I was to use up quite a number of lives. We got down to our one camp that was up high in the mountain, Camp 2, underneath this huge ice wing. Eventually, we spent an extra day there and then crawled back up to it because we didn't have time to get down, and then spent the next 2 days going down without tents, sleeping bags, or any water or any food as we headed back down the mountain, finally getting back down to base camp 10 days after we'd left. I think after an ascent like that, you're probably lucky if the only thing you really have is a bit of damage to your fingers, and this is my fingers back in Lhasa when I arrived back at the hotel there. Fortunately, we bumped into Bonington again, who you see here on the right, second from the right, just next to Joe Blackburn, our photographer. Miriam Zeman, our doctor, who had nothing to do for 6 weeks. And then for the last 2 weeks, had nothing but moaning, complaining, whimpering climbers. I'm there in the middle in the funny looking gray fleece jacket. Some of you might remember those horrible things. Jess Stock, Andy Fanshaw on the left, and Ed Webster on the far left. So we'd gone up and we'd done this new route on Everest. We'd pulled off quite a coup and really enjoyed it, but I hadn't quite summited. So I stepped back and I thought maybe I should take a look at some other peaks. And I always enjoyed the climbing, but I also liked the aspect of visiting the different countries and traveling the world. So just myself and my photographer, Joe Blackburn, over the next couple of years, we did all the rest of the 7 summits. Probably the highlight of that was climbing down in Mount Vinson in Antarctica, where I was able to do 2 new routes solo on the peak. But I think eventually the lure of Everest comes back again. And with that kind of experience, I decided to go back and attempt to solo the mountain. That's kind of a whole different thing. If I started with 20 people on my first expedition, was down to 4 climbers on my next one, I was now down to 1. And the feeling there was that it was a very kind of lonely place where you were all alone. And outside, it was pretty dramatic. This was my camp. I called it Camp One and Only, because that was kind of it. After I got on the North Face, I just climbed and attempted to bivouac at night, which was a rather cold experience. But outside, you're looking at this, and then inside, you've got some crazy starry-eyed person looking back up at you. This was long before I think selfies existed, but I thought it was a good idea. I had a route that the first time I was there to solo it that hadn't been done before, this immense couloir that led up the left-hand side of the North Face and then broke out onto the North Ridge. And a little bit like the Kangshung Face, I thought this will provide a way to do some fun and exciting climbing down low. Early in the season, it was just a bit icy, as you can see. And you can just, on the far left-hand side, you can just see one little person on the North Ridge. It kind of gives you a sense of the scale. I always feel quite small on Everest. And in my first attempt, I went out full of eagerness and enthusiasm, clambered up that couloir and then out onto the ridge and up bivouacked at just above 8,000 meters, looking out over, right in the center of the picture is Choyo Yu, just to the right of that's Gai Chen Kang, and then the lovely snow cone mountain is Primori. So looking down off of there, and I thought this would be a great place to camp. And then I've only got about 800 meters to go tomorrow. I'll be at the top. But unfortunately, during the night, it got so cold, I really couldn't even hardly think after a while. I managed to get through the night okay, but I knew I was getting frostbite and I could barely walk when I got up in the morning. So I took a quick picture. I think this is my mountain equipment custom designed suit at the time. We had these wonderful suits we'd had made for us, which kept us relatively warm, but without oxygen at 8,100 meters in early May on Everest, nothing really helped. So I scrambled back down the mountain and got home again. And I think that chapter is really a lesson what it's like to be alone and really have to make all your decisions on your own, climb by yourself, and of course, not make any mistakes. I wandered back over to the North Face a couple more times. There's fantastic skiing there. It's a whole different world. We never usually saw any people. You can ski up to about 6,500, 6,700 meters. And then of course you can ski down for a good 1,000 meters of vertical. A lot of times we'd ski up rope the first couple of times. And then after that, we just kind of dodged the crevasses. And as you can see from this section, it was just a little bit dodgy. You didn't want to get to the right or the left too far, but relatively stable glaciers up there. There were also, I think on the north side, oftentimes we go towards the end of the monsoon when the weather's it's warmer, but it's not particularly so good, but it's a better time to climb when you're trying to solo, and hopefully the air pressure is a bit better so you can perhaps eke out a bit more oxygen. So this was climbing up between the crevasses, way up high on the central Rongbuk Glacier, and then headed up the North Face, going up into the Great Couloir you see there, going up to the left, and then the summit right at the very top of the screen. So some fantastic climbing up there, some great lessons learned. Just to get a little sense of the scale, this is skiing down right below the North Face. And then on the right-hand side, if you imagine the other picture, this is shot with about 1,000 millimeter telephoto from Advanced Base Camp of 4 of us who were trying to climb the Super Couloir. and get up and out into the Hornbein and then go on to the top of the mountain. So this went on and on for about 5 years. I was there every year for 5 years in a row. Amazing view of Everest, just with its plume going across there, going in across Tibet, taking from the Panghua Pass. And I'm sure a few of you have been in there and looked across at this view, and it's probably one of the best views of Everest from anywhere. So after those attempts, I'd kind of taken a break, and I thought, this is really not for me. If I can't solo and I can't do it without oxygen, I'm not really that interested. I'll go rock climbing. I was living in New York at the time. I had 2 small children at that point in time. So I was like, let's give it a break. And by that time, on this, if you look at this, I'd been on the West Ridge up to about here. And then we ran out of oxygen and it wasn't working too well. Then I'd been on the Super Couloir up here, going up into the Hornbein, and got to about here and camped, and then it snowed. And then I got up here, and one year I soloed all the way up to about 8,400 meters, but it was 5 o'clock at night. I was probably another 8 hours to the top of the speed I was going, so that probably would have killed me as well. And then I'd done my new route, which Ed Webster kind of secretly stuck into Alpine magazine and called it the Anderson Couloir. So if he's going to call it that, I'll keep it there. And then I've been up on the North Ridge as high as about the first step. So I'd been all over this mountain, and I hadn't quite been to the top. So I gave it away, and I went off, and then I was invited to guide by Jagged Globe. And I did both Shishipangma, the lowest of the 8,000-meter peaks, and then Choyayu, the 6th highest mountain in the world. And in the background, you see Lhotse, and then Everest right here. And I was on that, and I had a couple of teams with me on both of them, and about 6 to 8 people, so small, but we climbed to that oxygen. I was still adapting my, why don't we skip the high camp and just go for the summit approach? And it seemed to be working, even with the teammates that I had that I was guiding on the mountains. And then suddenly the 50th anniversary rolled around, and they put my picture of Ed Webster on the front of the cover. And Jagged Globe called me up and said, hey, why don't you go back to Everest? And the other thing was, I'd shot a TV commercial down in Antarctica for Rolex, and every once in a while this thing just kept popping up on the screen, no matter what I would do, just to remind me that I was a climber.
To climb the highest mountains alone takes precision and endurance. Qualities you'll find in climbers like Robert Anderson. Qualities you'll find in his rugged Rolex Oyster Perpetual timepiece.
So with an invitation like that, we had quite a decent sized team of 10 or 12 people. Myself and David Hamilton, who you see here on the right, he hadn't summited yet either. And he came back with me to co-lead the climb. And we had a great group of people. And we took off and headed out up the mountain. Got up to our camp 2. We had another amazing person with us named Borge Olsland from Norway, who's probably one of the world's foremost polar explorers. He knows more about being cold and being chased by polar bears than I ever want to think about. So some great lessons from him. But we also realized just once again, there were some lives to potentially be used up here, and we had to be careful. As much as the South Pole has gotten to be much better known, and the ropes are pretty much in from the bottom to the top, some of this stuff falls down as it did a few years later. It's a very, very dangerous place to go climbing. You spend most of the time climbing at night, and it's colder, the weather's more stable. And the first thing you have to do, of course, is go through the ice fall, which is inherently unstable and about as dangerous as you can imagine. And even when you're out there, occasionally there's times when you are on your own or you're coming up or going down, particularly if you're guiding, when you're checking the ropes and things. And it can be a very, very lonely place out there by yourself. So it's still got this immense beauty. And it's really such a classic route going up through here. This is one of the areas that I looked through it that first time. And as you can see on the right-hand side, it wasn't a particularly thick wall of ice. And then a few days later, I went up there and the route had completely changed, which reminds you that probably wouldn't be a good place to be when it all decides to fall down. But there's a great camaraderie of the people up there. And we had a good experienced team of climbers. Peggy Foster was working to become the first Canadian woman to summit all the 7 summits. We had Kiehl from Holland. We had Dr. Fred Zeal from the US, and he was with us as well. Probably the most experienced of all of us actually on 8,000 meter peaks, because he'd already done about 4 of them. So you head up the Lhotse face, Everest there on the left, and then you get to Camp 3, which is up at about 7,500 meters. And here kind of gives you an idea what it's like climbing on Everest. None of it's particularly good. The tent at the top, you could sleep there, and it's relatively level, but the problem is that the avalanches come down and hit it a bit. And then you can sleep at the bottom tent, but that's about ready to fall off the mountains. That's not good. The ones in the middle, slightly protected, not falling off, but as you can see underneath them, the reason they're flat and level is because they're actually built on top of a crevasse. So hopefully you don't just fall into that. And those are the kind of choices you have to make some of the times you're on Everest. Get up the peak. I always usually adopt a friendly dog or two. This isn't encouraged, but they're pretty fun. And then I just let the Sherpas look after them when I'm away and don't tell anybody they're there. So this guy kept me company for the couple of weeks when I was in base camp. There are a lot of people in the South Col these days. It's one thing I talk about a bit in my book, is just how it's changed from that evolution of big expeditions to small expeditions and new routes and no oxygen, and now back to the times when we're guiding and there's a lot of people everywhere you go. This gives a sense of scale a little bit. We're going over the Geneva Spur, and you can just see somebody down here, bottom left. And then way up here, just coming down, this is the South Summit, and then the long summit ridge behind it is almost the top. So these people are just coming down in the afternoon, and we're making our way up to the South Col to camp for the night. And the South Col is here, another shot taken from Makalu, so quite a different view with Lhotse over here, and then Everest up here with that traditional plume. That's what it looks like when you're kind of close to the plume, as opposed to that perfect streaming thing that goes out across it. So you go up to the South Col, and then you kind of wander out of your tent in the middle of the night, go up across the ice, and then all the way up through here and up to what's called the balcony. And then from there, it's way up to the summit. Another 4 hours or so. Sunrise comes up, and I think if you ever have a moment when you feel more alive, it's pretty rare than when the sun comes up on Everest. It's about 5:30 in the morning. Incredibly cold, perfectly clear. You got both Makalu here, the 5th highest mountain in the world, and then way out here, Kangshung. It's right out on the border of Nepal and India. Makalu just a little bit closer, absolutely spectacular pyramid perched right next to Everest. And as if you look off to the west, you look down into the horizon almost, you can start to see Everest come up out of the clouds down there. Then it grows a bit as you climb a bit higher and the sun comes up a bit further. The ridge of Nuptse just there in front of us. And then looking back down, the ridge behind you, the South Col. And finally you reach the South Summit. And you've got here a few people, but not too bad for a windy day. And you're headed across, you just adjust your oxygen and change out your tank there. That's just the regulator that you see. The plume is literally, it's blue sky on the left, pure cloud on the right, and you head across. Hopefully, your views on the left are counteracting your kind of line that you see on the right. And we took this picture, we were headed down again, luckily. So we were out of this mix. This is what the Hillary step was like. And this is a rock that I believe fell off a few years ago. So now you've kind of got the Hillary slide, or the Hillary slope, as they might say. So you head on up there. That's looking exactly around the top of the Hillary step. And you go over that. In this instance, I was climbing with Sibu Sisu Balan, the first Black African to summit Everest. We got up to the top, took this great picture, which David Hamilton thankfully focused and shot and thought it was pretty good. And then, of course, we collapsed in a heap, and this is really what it feels like on the top of Everest. You just kind of sit there and gasp for air. Think about how far it is to get down again, particularly if you're guiding. So we headed back down, and this has been my 9th time, and I thought, well, I haven't died in the Kumbha's fall. I made it up the Lhotse face. I actually felt quite good on the ascent. We climbed with a whole team of people, and they'd all gotten up to the top. And then right below us, just on the ridge, literally 50 meters below the top, Fred Zeal stopped, our doctor on the expedition. And when I came back down to him, I said, I'll go back up to the top again with you. And he said, no, I can't see. So even as much as Everest is a little bit more predictable these days, when you have somebody and one of your teammates is up that high, you have to help them down. So for the next 14 hours, David Hamilton and I shepherded him back down the mountain, thinking all the time that maybe that was my ninth life and I was about to lose it because I was certainly not going to stay up there with anybody. Fortunately, Fred is a fantastic climber, very intuitive, and literally came all the way down the mountain and got back to the South Col without really being able to see much. We could scamper back down the next day and fly out by the first helicopter we could get on. But it never really gives you a break, Everest, I don't think. And this is Fred back down in base camp. He was back to his doctor duties. He had plenty of things to do, fixing up one of our Sherpa's fingers there, Borgi Olsland on the far right, and Sherpas gather around to assist. It's his own little medical clinic back down in base camp. So that was how we got down off the peak. This is a shot taken in 2010, I believe. And we were there and coming down at this time. And it was very similar to what the shot that Nims Persia shot just last year, where you get this backup of climbers. And unfortunately, with the weather forecast nowadays, you get perfect weather, but everybody's there at the same time and headed for the top. So it's still a very, very challenging mountain. And just the last shot as you come down off the hill, looking around the south summit and then back down from up high. And you can just see at the very bottom on this right-hand side, that's the camp down on the South Col. And then you go out across here and over to the Geneva Spur and down there. This is the fantastic couloir on Lhotse, which was just skied a few years ago. It's quite phenomenal. You can see why people want to climb Lhotse. It's a gorgeous peak, and that couloir just looks fantastic. Still plenty to do in the Himalayas. So I just wanted to finish off. This was the last shot of me on the Kangshung Face when we were over there pretty much all by ourselves. And I think as much as Everest has this perception now of being overcrowded, too many people, a bit trashy, and unfortunately a few dead bodies lying around, there's still plenty of adventure to be had. There's certainly been a lot that I've had over the last 20 years, which is kind of what I touch on in the book, is all the opportunities that are still out there for adventures. People just want to go to other parts of the world, not even go near Everest. There's a lot to explore and to see. I thought I might finish just with one last video. We did this as a book trailer, and it takes about a minute, but it kind of hits on the top quotes that I had from the people that helped me out with the book. The conversation turns to mountains. Inevitably then, people ask if you climbed Everest, and I can thankfully say yes, I have a couple of times. People ask the real question, which is, have you ever almost died? Well, of course. So I'll just finish on that note. I was very pleased that finally I had a long career in advertising and I had so many campaigns. I love illustration, I love artwork, and I never managed to sell a campaign with an illustration. And then when I was looking at potential book covers and I went and talked to a publisher, I said, you know, what about an illustration after I'd seen a few? And they said, yeah, we know a great illustrator. I think we have one we could work with. And so I worked with him and he just drew a picture. It's kind of like with Choi Yu and all that in the background and me kind of scrambling up the side of Everest somewhere below the South Summit, I would suppose. But it's great to be able to kind of break the rules and put that together. And it is a challenging time for all publishers, so it's great to have the support from Vertebrae and give you a chance to actually order the book from them or find it, as we say, in all fine bookstores. If you don't see my book, you must not be in a fine bookstore. So you'll just have to go around and find it there. Peter Hillary was kind enough to write the foreword for me. His dad, Ed, had written the forwards for both Seven Summits Solo and To Everest Valley, Antarctica, so it carried on a nice tradition. And then the last video in there was done by my daughter, Phoebe, so it's a little bit of a collection of New Zealanders putting things together and making it work as I launched this book in the UK. I think I can cut back to you now, Matt, and if people have questions or if they send anything through, we can take those.
Thank you very much, Robert. Enjoyed that. Appreciate it. I've been posting a few things in the chat. Okay, we just had our first question through. So, guys, if you are not aware of the chat, if you go down, move your mouse down to the bottom, there's a little chat icon down there. Click on that, and you'll see a few messages from me on there. Yeah, post some questions on there. If anyone feels a burning desire to ask them out loud, by all means unmute your microphone and ask during a suitable pause. But I'll start the ball rolling with the old favorite, what's next on the list?
What's next? Well, I was signed up to guide Everest again this year with Jagged Globe, and I love doing treks, and I've got a number of those I'm going to do. So I've got both something going out into Pakistan with the mountain company and also to Upper Dolpo at the end of next year. So just areas I haven't explored yet that I really want to get out and see. So as soon as things open up and we're allowed to go places, I'll be out doing things.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself then. Anybody want to unmute their microphone and ask any questions? I've got another one here. Graham has asked, how do you mentally prepare for your expeditions?
I think that's a good question. A lot of times there's not a lot of preparation. I'm not sure you can do that. I think other climbs is always good. And certainly in the first chapter of my book, I talk about intuition. And David Brashears, I used to climb with when we were quite young in rock climbing, he used to say, people need to serve their apprenticeship so you know what you're doing. And so then when you get out there, you're ready to climb and you feel confident. And certainly on the solos, that was part of it, was preparing for it that way. I think as I go back now, I think the importance of being fit and healthy and training for the peak certainly helps. So the physical aspect of it. I think the other thing is doing as much climbing as you can, obviously, and other sporting activities. So you're healthy and fit to get out there and climb. And then I think really working out who your team is. Even when we're guiding, I spend quite a little bit of time beforehand. The people that were supposed to go this year with me, I talked to them on the phone. I'd met up with them. One of them I'd even get hiking with. Got to meet and know quite well before we ever go to the mountain. So it's really important, that kind of team aspect, even if you're going out for the first time on something.
Okay, we've got a good one here. This is from, it says, it's Joe here from Antarctica, brackets, currently in Salisbury, sorry, brackets. I don't think your Chinese team on Vincent knew quite who was guiding them. If you were to put together your dream expedition, what would it be?
It would probably be Joe Bradshaw. She's a great climber. Thank you, Joe. No, I actually, just to go back to the Vincent thing, I had an amazing team of Chinese clients. They actually put me in my place a bit, but I think some people have stereotypes about some of these guided groups and things. And I had 2 younger Chinese women and 1 Chinese guy, and then we had another group of 4 guys. And we had the most fun. It was just the most phenomenal group of people. We were laughing, dancing, and having fun all the way to the top of the mountain. It was really quite amazing. Anyway, my dream team these days. I really enjoy doing things with Peter Hillary because he's just a whole lot of fun. We did Karsten's Pyramid together, and we have some other plans to go forward in the future. Him and his sons are great. My son and my daughter both are fantastic. They're both in New Zealand now. And my daughter's kind of freed up from university, so might have some time to do some more with me. So it's great to go out with the family. My wife, Josephine Clark, she's a guide as well as a very good climber. We did Denali together last year and have a few more plans, again, when things open up. So certainly she'd be in there. So it's very much a collection of close friends. But at the same time, when I'm guiding, I also like to have a team of people who are completely, I don't know, and you wouldn't expect sometimes to be as good or as fun as they might be. like the Chinese clients that I guided on Vincent. So I'm pretty open. I usually find that people have a love of the mountains and a little bit of common sense, perhaps. It makes for a good team.
Here's another one. Do you think the commercial teams are ruining the magic of small team ascents?
If anything, the commercial teams are dominating the two routes on Everest and the other mountains, but usually by one route only. So if you want to go and have that experience, you can, but because then that experience is so kind of condensed into one area, you've got all the rest, particularly on Everest, of the mountain to yourself. So if anything, it's helping. And I also think that a lot of the teams and the more experienced commercial operators that go to Everest are actually quite significantly helping the Sherpa population there, and it allows the Sherpas to work and the porters to make a living as well, and then to help kind of further their own lives and that of their families and their kids. So there's certainly both sides to the story, and I think of the mountains out there and the places to go. There's a million places in the world to go that nobody have ever heard of and don't care about, which I occasionally visit and guide in, and we just don't talk about it. They've disappeared. So if you want to go there and experience commercial expeditions and go to that side of the mountain, yeah, you can do that, but that's a choice. And if you want to go somewhere else and be completely on your own, that's also an opportunity. So it kind of depends on what you want when you go climbing.
I've got a couple more for you. Is there one mountain you haven't been to yet that you plan to get to?
I'd love to do, this is just off the top of my head because there's a lot of, but Sidley, which is a volcano in Antarctica, which is the tallest volcano in Antarctica, and it's absolutely astounding. You got to fly out there for a day and a half. It's an absolute expedition just to get there. The climbing is not particularly difficult, but it's relatively high, 4,000 meters, maybe something like that. And it's just so remote and so isolated. I really love Antarctica. I'm very interested in doing one of the Gasherbrum peaks, probably in the Karakoram, with my wife. We want to go out there and do some climbing. And of course, I'm looking forward to actually getting back to Everest one more time and doing that as well. So there's plenty to do.
One from Keith. I enjoyed reading Stephen Venable's description of crossing the jaws of death on the Kangshung Face. Was this the hardest part of the route?
Well, from a logistics point of view, perhaps. And, you know, Stephen went up and looked in that crevasse and he came down and he said, I think it's going to take a Tyrolean. And I was like, no way. You can't do that at that altitude. And then he said, well, have you ever done one? And I said, yeah, because I'd done one in Outward Bound. And he was like, perfect. I'm like, I still think you're crazy. But anyway, Ed Webster and I went up and we rappelled into that thing and came out. And then we went back up the next day and rappelled in and went up, Ed climbed up the other side. And then the next day I went up and Ed belayed me and I fixed the ropes and slung across the thing on one thin, I think we had 8mm ropes left at the time because we'd run out. And fixed the ropes up higher and put all the anchors in and came back and it was done. So it was quite tricky, but it wasn't as hard as certainly the climbing that Ed and Stephen and Paul did down lower, the mixed things that we were doing. The rock was not particularly good. It was beautiful rock, but it wasn't good rock. And the ice climbing, you know, there were vertical overhanging sections that these guys were doing. It was quite amazing. It was phenomenal climbing.
I think we are maybe running to the end of the questions. I had one question actually, Robert.
Okay.
I don't know how relevant this is to Everest, but during lockdown, a lot of places have been using the opportunity to clean up, refurbish, think again about how they might do things. Is there any elements of that being going on with Everest and the I guess the circus that the popular routes that you just described are kind of become in our eyes?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much an ongoing theme with the Western guides that I work with there and the companies that are there. I think it's gotten better. Certainly, you know, it was the the worst kind of state base camp was in was on my first expedition way back in 1985. It was just a trash heap. And by the time we went back in 2003, pretty much everything was carted out. And there's the occasional expedition that just doesn't seem to know how to pick up their trash, but the rest of us do it for them. As far as the kind of the crowding up high, it's really challenging because if you get a small weather window, people obviously want to go to the top, and you got to kind of squeeze into that. It's something that usually up high, even though it's written about a lot, people crawling over the top of each other. Yes, there's a bit of that, but in general, most of the guides that are up there are working together, and we're calling out to each other, or we're on the radio, and we kind of figure it out as to who goes first and where they go. I'm not sure this is necessarily more of a pause. I think part of it's driven by the inabilities of the Nepalese to actually put any decent infrastructure in place to assist or carry through on some of the plans that they occasionally come up with. So, but certainly the guiding companies and there's more and more Sherpa companies who are very, very talented and are coming up and are offering very good packages. And so we're working with them as well, which is a great change to see that the local people are doing the things that for many years we were doing and thought couldn't be done much better, but they're coming in and really helping out and changing the scene there.
Thank you. One more on here from Colby. Where did you grow up?
I'm from Colorado in the US. So I started climbing when I was 15 years old, rock climbing. A lot of rock climbing, and then went on, did the Diamond, did El Cap, Half Dome, and all the kind of rocks in Yosemite Valley. Climbed there, and then moved on to the Andes in South America, and then on to Everest in the Himalayas from there.
Busy life.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got another one from Martin. How do you prepare for climbing without oxygen at altitude? Do you use any particular training techniques at both lower and higher altitudes?
That's a hard one, Martin. I would say, well, Messner said eat garlic. That seemed to work for him. I think a really consistently kind of easy acclimatization plan is all you can really do. It doesn't have much to do with fitness. And a lot of times, particularly on my treks, I find people who are older and slower and more concerned actually go slower and acclimatize better than if you're younger and fitter, because you get up, you feel good after 3 days, and then you go too fast. So it's almost better to slow down and take it easy. For myself, I just do a lot of it's mostly cardiovascular exercise. Right now, since I'm in Dubai, I'm doing triathlon. So the longer those are, the better. And it's certainly good as you get a bit older as well. But there's no magic way to acclimatize. Certainly down lower when we're trekking in, I take Diamox. And I wrote an article on my blog about that with Peter Hackett's input about just taking a quarter tablet of Diamox, which I'm a big supporter of and think it works. I don't tell people to take it, but the ones that do take it seem to be better, and the ones that don't aren't as well. But once I'm up high on Everest, once I'm in base camp and above, at that altitude, I don't take anything because I like to know, even if I'm not feeling as good, I like to know where my head's at exactly. So I don't even take aspirin up high or anything. I just tough it out so I know what my head feels like.
We've got a few more questions coming. A longer one, this one from John Joe Knott. Hi, Robert. I've been on the west ridge of Everest myself. The route looked formidable head on above 8,000 meters. Was that the intention of your west ridge climb, or was it to push onto the north face and ascend the Hornbein Couloir?
No, we went there to do the West Ridge direct, and there was some talk as we realized that it was harder than we thought of curving out into the Hornbein. I'm not sure we would have made that anyway. And certainly the climbing up above that camp that you saw, you would have recognized that picture very well. We were up probably about the level of the next camp up 8,000 meters or so in that picture looking down. That climbing up there is pretty hard. From camp 4 to camp 5 is kind of hard, and I put in most of the ropes up there. You definitely want ropes. And then above that, going to the summit, it was real hard. I was up there first with Pete Athens and then with Jay Smith on our 2 attempts, and it's steep. It's literally vertical kind of rock climbing on mediocre rock and crampons. It's like you want to be pretty comfortable in some pretty outrageous situations to climb up there. But it's an amazing route. I don't think it's been done since I think there was a first and then a second ascent, and people died on both of them, and then it hasn't been done since. So amazing route. It's great to know that somebody else has actually been out there on that. if nothing else on the West Ridge, the views are the best you'll get on Everest. Just phenomenal, just phenomenal.
Okay, two more. What's the most technical climb you've ever undertaken?
Well, if you go into rock climbing, it was probably during El Cap, back when we still had to like nail a few pitches here and there. You know, that was hard. The climbing was probably 5'10", 5'11", and then you got A3 or whatever on El Caps. The pins are popping out underneath your feet. That's pretty highly technical. When it comes to ice, I went to university for a few years up in the Northwest. We used to do a lot of waterfall climbing up there. And I don't remember the names of them. I'm not sure they had names at the time we were doing it, but it's back when if you had a pair of what these people remember them, these ridiculous foot fangs with big plastic plates on them. If you had a pair of those, you were probably better than the next guy in a set of hummingbirds. So those were hard. Those were very hard ice climbs and usually kind of melting at the same time. And then a bit of mixed stuff in the middle. And then Colorado, of course, has got Bridal Veil, which is fantastic. And then some amazing new routes that I used to go up and do in Rocky Mountain National Park with some of my friends there.
Okay, maybe wrapping this up shortly then. So what mountains have you climbed in Europe?
I've done Mont Blanc a few times. I love Mont Blanc. You just got to go in the off season, like on most of these mountains. It's fantastic. I did the Matterhorn a very, very long time ago and soloed it in winter up the East Face. And then out onto the Hornley to finish. That was fantastic. I did a lot of climbing up in Norway because I lived up there for a couple of years. My middle name is actually my middle name, Mads, and it's quite common in Norway and Denmark. It was my father's first name. At least he didn't ladle me with that. So the mod's part of my heritage. And I did a lot of climbing very early on, rock climbing. I wasn't up there really in the winter when the ice was good, but we did a lot of new routes up in the Romsdal area of Norway, which were just fantastic.
Fantastic. Oh no, here's another one just come through. To what extent has the evolution of equipment altered the experience over your lifetime?
I think it's been pretty dramatic. You know, it's originally, you know, that certainly, you know, if you're going up to do things which aren't that difficult, like on the North Face, ages ago, people wouldn't have been soloing those at all. Whereas now you can go up there quite comfortably and solo on that ground. I think if you're a competent climber, which is great. The other thing is, of course, the warmth. I'm an ambassador for Loa boots. And, you know, in the old days, we used to get frostbite all the time. All three of us that were up high in the Kangshung Face, we all came back minus a few toes. And basically, my toes just don't get cold now. I've got Loa's 8,000-meter boots, and you're fine. And I wear those in Antarctica and up on Denali. So that's probably one of the biggest changes. And then even the gloves are quite a bit better. I trialed a pair of mountain equipment gloves down in Antarctica, and they were just so much better than some of the other ones I'd had. They were kind of like these funny two fingers in each hand were together, and that made such a big difference. I'd done an article the year before with a British doctor, Chris Imray, who knows a lot about frostbite. And we kind of worked together on things and looked at all the research and things like that. And he came up with this idea that it was probably better to have fingers together in certain ways and things. Found those gloves from Mountain Equipment, used those. So, and then the core things, I don't think normally if you're moving quick enough, your core and the main part of your body doesn't get that cold. It's usually pretty good. So it's nice to have Gore-Tex and a bit of stuff. So pretty monumental. And as I mentioned, the ice tools and the crampons and everything are so much lighter and better than they ever have been. So still room to grow though in that area, definitely.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. We've been going for about an hour, which is what we advertised it as. So I think we'll probably wrap up for the evening. Thank you very much, guys. I shall close the meeting in a minute. I'll email out the links tomorrow in case anybody didn't get them on the chat. Yeah, it would be fab if you could donate via the PayPal address, and I will split proceeds with Robert. And we'll continue to, well, Robert will continue to go climbing and write books, and I'll continue to put events on. And hopefully one day we'll see you in the real world, on a stage somewhere, or in a bar somewhere, or on a mountain somewhere.
Yes, that's true. It'd be very nice to be back out and be doing a book launch properly and going store to store and talking to people. But in the meantime, I much appreciate people like taking the time to listen to a few of my stories, and hopefully you can find the book out there and have a good read. Thank you very much.